Welcome to the Week 6 video lecture. This week we're going to be talking about Kantian ethics. This is otherwise referred to as deontology. In this week's readings, we're going to focus on the theory of ethics put forward by Immanuel Kant. To get started, I'd like to discuss the idea of the will as Kant presented it. Now, you won't find this in any of the readings, and since you can't use any outside sources, this isn't something you're going to do any research on. I just think it's a nice introduction to Kantian ethics, and it's worth spending some time thinking about. Immanuel Kant's theory of the will comes from his metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of first principles, or what kinds of things exist. When philosophers do metaphysics, they typically answer questions like, does God exist? Or does the mind exist? And what is the nature of the mind? Immanuel Kant was a very famous metaphysician in his own right. He was very good at doing metaphysics, in addition to being a very famous ethicist. Around the time that Kant was writing, philosophers thought that human action was determined by desires. So we were a kind of battleground for all of these desires. And the strongest desire was what caused us to act. So, when I was hungry, it was because I had a strong desire to eat. When I was sleepier and I went to sleep, it was because I had a strong desire to sleep. And when I was hanging out with my friends, it was because I had a strong desire for companionship. Now, Kant resisted this idea, and he wants to say that human action is the result of the will. So Kant wants to say that there's this thing independent of desires called the will. And the will is what causes us to do X or to do Y or to perform certain actions. So in addition to this, all of these desires that we also have this thing that can allow us to say yes or no, I do want to do these things. Let's see. And so when I'm hungry, it's because I will to eat that I decide to eat, not because I have the strong desire. When I'm sleepy, I decide to sleep. It's not that I have this strong desire to sleep. So Kant thought that the human will, this ability to will things, was pure and that it was good. He thinks that the human will is the best thing. It's the only thing that's good in itself. And we can contrast this to the theories of hedonism that we read about last week, where they say that pleasure is the best thing. Here, we say that the human will is the only thing that's good in itself, not pleasure. So what Kant is doing, when he's doing this theory of ethics, is he's trying to come up with principles or rules for the will to act according to. The will can't just do anything it wants to in order to be a good will. It has to do certain kinds of things. And it turns out that reason decides what rules there are for the will. Kant thinks of two kinds of rules that reason can create for the will. There are the rules that we should follow if we want something, and there are the rules that we should follow, period, regardless of whether we want something. We all follow hypothetical imperatives in our daily lives. These are the rules that we set up in order to achieve certain goals. For instance, if you want an A in this Introduction to Ethics course, some of the rules that you should follow are to read and complete all the assignments on time. Now, these rules only apply to you if you have that goal. If your goal is not to get an A in this course, then it doesn't really matter. Then those rules don't really apply to you. Now, if you're not enrolled in this course at all, it would be very funny to say that those rules apply to you. You don't see your family members or friends who aren't enrolled in this class trying to read or submit assignments into the course Moodle on time. It's just rules that we should follow, rules that we set for our will if we want to achieve certain goals. And we follow these in everyday life, not just in this class. So these are hypothetical imperatives. These are the things that we set up if we want to achieve certain goals. These are very different from categorical imperatives. And categorical imperatives are rules that we should follow all of the time and that everybody should follow, no matter what. So even if we have different goals from each other, these are the rules that we should still follow. Now, Rachels gives us two of Kant's categorical imperatives, two of the rules that Kant thinks that we should follow no matter what. And the first one is the prohibition against lying. That's the rule that we shouldn't lie. And the second one is that we should be good to each other, or that we should help people in need. Now, there's a lot of controversy about what the actual categorical imperatives are, and you can see this from the reading, right? So on this prohibition against lying, it looks like Rachel's is trying to make it sound like there are cases when it's okay to lie. For instance, when the murderer shows up at your doorstep and asks where your friend is. If you were to tell the truth in that case, it could result in a pretty bad consequence. And so this rule looks like it's kind of a little bit controversial. Nonetheless, Kant thinks it's true. But what Kant does is he gives us a formula for coming up with these categorical imperatives. He gives us a rule for coming up with these rules that everybody should follow. This is given on page 130, and it's very important. It is that we should act only according to the maxim or the rule which you can follow or which you can will that it become a universal law. And what he means by this is that any moral rule or any categorical imperative, it must be a rule that everybody can follow all the time. And so if the rule cannot be made universal, then that rule doesn't work. It's not a moral rule that we should follow. It's not a categorical imperative. So this requires some imagination on our end when we're applying Kant's test to see if a rule is a categorical imperative. So we can consider the example of lying. If you want to lie, according to Kant, we must imagine a world in which everybody lies all of the time. And we have to ask ourselves, would lying still work in that world? And the answer looks like no, because the point of lying is to deceive or to hide the fact from somebody. But if you always lie and everybody knows it's the rule that you have to always lie, then people will know that you're lying when you lie. And so the point of lying, to deceive or to hide the fact, doesn't work. It's ineffective. So it looks like we can't all follow the rule to lie all the time, because then lying wouldn't work. And so it follows that lying can't be a universal rule. It doesn't follow that we should lie all the time, or that we can follow the rule to lie. And so a good thing to think about, maybe for the discussion forum, is whether you can think up of your own universal rules. Rules that would pass Kant's test that he gives on page 130. Can you imagine a world in which everybody follows that rule? And if you can, then it's a categorical imperative. If not, then it can't be a categorical imperative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.